Story 1. In 1972, I overheard my mom telling my dad about a breast cancer diagnosis, and it was somewhat advanced. Back then, she had been given a survival percentage of 5% over a few years, given it had metastasized. Scary as hell. She is still kicking today at 85. Story 2. When I was 6 years old, I was sitting in the living room watching a show when I overheard my mother crying over the phone with my grandmother on my father's side. I went to ask her what was wrong, and she gave me the saddest look I've seen to this day and told me to go find a book for her to read to me. The next day, my mother took me and my two younger brothers to my grandparents' house, where we sat on the porch. Everyone in my immediate family was there, including my aunt, uncle, grandparents, and, of course, my brothers and mother. I was told that my father had died yesterday. I didn't know how he died for the next few years. No one ever told me. Then, when I was 10 years old, my mother pulled me aside and told me that my father had hung himself in my grandparents' garage. I still remember every detail. Story 3. I didn't necessarily overhear this, but I asked my dad why he had condoms when I saw them in his drawer. Knowing my mom is unable to have any more children, he said with a straight face, "That's for when your mom wants anal. Some questions are better left unasked." Story 4. My mom was reading to my brother and me when we were kids. My dad came in, teary-eyed, and kissed us, then walked out. My mom got up and followed him out, but he wouldn't stop for her. When they stopped in the kitchen, I went through on my way to my room to see if I could see what was happening. My dad had a gun in his hand, and my mom was stopping him from leaving. Pretty sure I saw my dad almost kill himself. Neither of my parents ever acknowledged it again. Story 5. I remember hearing my mom cry and scream while pregnant with my younger sister, asking my dad why he kept being unfaithful. I was 10 at the time, and he continued this behavior until I was 25 years old. Story 6. My mom told my dad I was an accident and that he could have just kept it in his pants. I was 8 years old. She was a little bit drunk and doesn't remember. Story 7. I once overheard my mom telling my dad that she didn't know how much longer she could handle my attitude. It hit hard, especially since I thought I was doing okay. Definitely made me rethink how I was acting around them for a while. Story 8. I'm adopted, and once when I was a child, I'm 37 now, I heard my mom on the phone with her doctor telling him she'd experienced another miscarriage. Yes, this makes 13. I knew they'd had difficulties conceiving before adopting me, but hearing that number broke my heart and still does, especially because she's the greatest mom ever. Story 9. It was a mistake taking me in after my mom walked out on me. I heard my father's second wife say this to him the night after I came to live with them. She said I was trouble and would ruin the life they had built. She also proceeded to explain how unfair it was to her son. I was 10. My mother had been hiding me from my father. She was a horrible addict who used me for welfare money. She took off with a boyfriend on a Saturday morning, leaving me alone in an empty crack house for a month. I was scared. Someone contacted my father, and he came and got me. I came to a new type of hell. Thank you, Mom. Thank you, Father. Made life hard. Story 10. Overheard my stepmom telling my fiancé the heartwarming story of when she first met my dad and knew she would marry him one day. I was never told this story for the following reasons. My stepmom was previously my babysitter when I was about 6 months to 1 year old. My dad was married to my mom, who was going through chemotherapy and would pass away shortly after my first birthday, when they first met. I pretended I didn't hear and subtly stopped my fiancé from punching my stepmom. Story 11. When my brother passed away from a car accident, my mother was in tears and could not stop crying. My narcissistic and inconsiderate father told her, "If you really wanted to see him, then you should have made the arrangements earlier before he passed away." She did not work and was a stay-at-home mother, so of course, she relied on him for everything. It was just one of the cruelties I witnessed from him. My father passed away 10 years after my brother's death. He was alone in his condo with no one near him who cared for him except for some young woman he found, who was siphoning and stealing his money and assets he had taken from me. Story 12. My father asked my mother if she had a choice between me, their teenage daughter, Getting gang raped or having to quit smoking, which would she choose? The silence said it all. Story 13. My mom. When she forgot to end a call, I heard how she cried and smashed things in the house, saying, "Why God? Why me? Why can't I be next to my daughter? I was 4 and my parents were going through a divorce. That is the worst thing I ever heard in my life." Story 14. The year was 1986. I was 24 years old, living on my own and engaged. My super fundamental Baptist mom saw my fiancé's car parked outside my apartment early one morning and naturally assumed he had spent the night, which he did because he lived 2 hours away from me. The next time I saw her, she called me a common whore. This wonderful man and I have been married almost 39 years. Yes, I'm still salty about this. Story 15. Apologies. These weren't overheard but were instead said to me directly. I had typed it all out before I reread the question. My bad. Among many things my stepmom said to me when I was growing up, these two stand out as the worst. 1. I had just turned 8. 3 days before when her mom, who lived in another country, suddenly died. I was taken to my grandma's house, and when they came back, she told me that it was my fault her mother had died because it had been my birthday and that she would still be alive if I didn't exist. She continued to remind me of this for many years. At the age of 16, I asked them to come to a swim meet, as I had reached the national level for the only time. I lived away at school most of the year as she hated me being at home, and this meet was close to their house, so it seemed normal to invite them. Dad came to watch, but she didn't. As soon as I saw her when I got home from school for the holidays, I could sense the rage radiating from her. When Dad went to work, she told me that there was something wrong with me. It wasn't normal to want to spend time with my dad at my age, and that I was an abnormal freak and a pervert for asking him to go. She said that I must fancy my dad. That was the only explanation, and that I disgusted her. People like me are perverted freaks. I didn't hug or touch my dad until I was in my late 30s. I wish I'd known then that she was actually completely insane, but as a kid, I unfortunately believed and absorbed every nasty thing she told me about myself, and now, in my 50s, I still have to remind myself that I'm not the person she convinced me I was. Story 16. I was a weird, shy, quiet kid, and even today I still am. I overheard Mom tell my dad that St. Jimmy just turns her right off. He's so weird that she doesn't know why any girl would ever want him. Why can't he just be normal? Of course, Mom says this didn't happen. Or if it did, I misremembered. Or if I didn't, it wasn't that big a deal. Or if it was, then I need to stop being so sensitive. Story 17. Mom to Dad over the phone. Why is it when I want to have sex with you, you turn away from me? I was about 10, so barely any understanding of sex, but enough to get the point. Story 18. My mother told me, when I was an adult, that my late father loved me but didn't like me very much. That broke my heart, and I've never quite gotten over it. She died recently too, so I just have to live with that, I guess. Story 19. My dad was telling my mom, I told you to leave her with child services. You're the one who wanted her back. Because I was annoying him by asking to use the family computer for homework. I think the only reason it was so horrible was because I didn't want to come back either. The time I spent in foster care was the best part of my childhood, and I still miss my foster family. Story 20. That my dad does not believe in the career path I chose, and that he thinks I will not achieve anything with my degree. Basically, that he does not believe in me. I chose to study psychology. He wanted me to go into finance or economics. Story 21. I lived with my dad and his wife for about 2 months when I was 16. The first 3 years of them being together were lovely. She was good to me and we got along well. She had 2 daughters, and the oldest one was the same age as me. I got along well with my stepsisters until her oldest daughter moved in, and we just stopped getting along. My stepsister would lie and eventually began to make very disturbing statements about me on Twitter, which was scary. One included wanting to stab me over being upset about having an argument with her mom, which stemmed from her mom finding out about her lying about some money. Another alarming post included wanting to bash my head in because her mom and my dad were arguing, which again had nothing to do with me, as the argument started over their own issues, and she thought I was repeating things back to him. I was scared and told my dad, which resulted in him confronting her mom about her alarming statements and telling her that she needed to put her on medication because it was not normal to have thoughts like that. All of that resulted in our parents arguing, and her mom yelled at him that he was putting everything off on her daughter and making it out to be her fault. I had already called my mother to come get me and had my stuff packed. I heard my dad clearly say, "Should I send her back to her mom's?" It was extremely heartbreaking as he basically admitted that all this meant more to him than fixing the situation. His wife also treated me poorly when he was not around. I told him later that I never wanted him to choose between me and his family. I just wanted him to believe me when I told him those things. He has apologized countless times, and I have forgiven him, but we just cannot get along as the whole ordeal damaged me pretty badly in my young years. My heart goes out to everyone who went through a situation like that with step-parents. Story 22. Asking me why I couldn't have been a boy, telling me they would never get me married off, telling me they weren't going to waste money on my school pictures because I was fat and ugly, the list goes on. Yet, both of them were quick to try to take credit for any accomplishment I had. Story 23. Not so much overheard as said directly to me, their oldest, "Mom, make sure you are financially ready before you have kids, because we didn't and we never recovered. Dad." Asterisk nods solemnly. Asterisk. Story 24. I was 36 and was on the phone with my mom. She was mad at my dad. Surprise, surprise. And she slipped and said I should have been aborted. My life would have been so different. I am an only child for context and have been struggling with existence since I was 5. I finally got closure and no longer talk to them. Story 25. Heard them talking negatively about me to a family member. I was grieving the grandfather I had been taking care of and didn't want to be around people while I was grieving, and my mom went and made it about herself. Story 26. It's not working, we need to discipline him more firmly. Okay, I'll start using the large frying pan. Just prior to me starting to receive the first of several traumatic brain injuries that are now degrading my ability to move, feel things below the waist, and think logically. Story 27. My mom has definitely said plenty of upsetting things to me, but the worst was, "You don't get to have sex you regret and call it rape." I had been assaulted at 14 by a 19-year-old. I waited a month to tell my mom because I was afraid she'd blame me. She did. Story 28. This is not as saddening as the other comments. When I was in first grade, my mom's bedroom was in the attic, and the entrance to her room was in my bedroom. I would often hear her and her boyfriend at the time talking inappropriately to each other. I told my mom I could hear them, and she told me to shut the door if it bothered me so much. It helped a little. Story 29. My dad said to my sister that she was his favorite daughter right in front of me. It's just me and my sister. This was said after my sister gave my dad some money for Christmas. I knew this, but hearing it stung. To be fair, I never liked my dad, so I guess the feeling is mutual. Story 30. Not overheard, but my mom called me a burden. The only reason I had been staying around was to take care of her in her declining health. She's in a home now. Story 31. When I was 13, my parents argued in front of me about who wanted me less. I don't want her. Well, I don't want her. Then my mom turned to me and said directly, "See, nobody wants you." I wrote in my diary that night, which I still have, "You see why I feel like nobody loves me? Nobody wants me." I internalized it immediately. Story 32. Overheard my dad describe me as a mistake in an effort to console someone about making mistakes. Them expressing guilt about something. Dad, yes. And I have an ex-wife and a 16-year-old daughter. We all make mistakes. I stopped listening through the door and went to bed at that point. Story 33. Around age 9, I heard my parents talking about how they were only staying married for my sake. But once I graduated high school, they would divorce. They divorced 5 years later. It was a difficult 5 years. Story 34. I was upstairs sobbing my damn eyes out while my stepdad comforted my mom, and she called me horrible things that my brain has actually blocked out at this point. The point was, she had practically given up on me, and my stepdad, whom I trust, was on her side. Story 35. Apologize for ruining my relationship with your stepsister by telling her you were sexually assaulted when you were a child. He was not the abuser of this event. My borderline stepsister weaponized my story, told in confidence, to cause harm to him. I refused to apologize. He walked away, saying I was dead to him. A few years before his death, I mourned his loss in my life. Story 36. I was sleeping in my dad's bed when he was having problems with my mom, and I heard him answer a phone call at 2 a.m., talking about how he wished he moved to Canada and how he would run away with her. I don't know who she is, but I've never brought it up because I'm scared. Story 37. While beating me in the kitchen in front of my kids, she told me I was a money-hungry person, despite the fact that I had saved her from foreclosure and paid her bills. Now she wonders why I do not talk to her. Story 38. I recently learned about narcissistic family dynamics, and I was my dad's scapegoat, which finally answered some lingering questions. Quite a few times, I'd heard him complaining to my mother about what a freeloading, selfish, immature, irresponsible, disrespectful person I was. Other times, he'd be criticizing her for constantly defending me and how she never supported him on anything regarding me.